Romans 12 says that I'm offering my body as a living sacrifice, which is my spiritual service of worship. Once I receive Jesus Christ, that from that day on, everything I do is sacred. So I don't have a secular life anymore. Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. A lot of people have a list, like first I seek the kingdom, then my family. But Jesus only gave us one priority: seek the kingdom. If you see yourself as a royal priest and you realize that you've offered your body as a living sacrifice, what I do at work and what I do with my family is as holy as what I do on Sunday morning when the music's going and I'm raising my hands.
What's up, friends? Welcome to not just another episode of the Steve Weatherford Show. I'm in Redding, California, and we are at Bethel Media Studios right now, and I'm joined with somebody who I've been watching on the YouTube interwebs for a really long time, and I've also been benefiting. I've listened to thousands, and I'm not kidding you, thousands and thousands of hours of Bethel worship, because when I had a radical encounter with the Holy Spirit, like I finally knew that God was real and that he was good, but I knew that I needed my brain, still needed to not just heal, it needed to be reconditioned of these thoughts and the porn that I've seen and all this stuff. And so I literally listened to only worship music for 1 year. So the man that I'm talking to, I've only got 30 minutes with him because we're actually at the Braveco Men's Conference. So priority is that we serve these men, but there is a small break. And so I asked Pastor Kris Vallotton, who is a man of God. He's a husband, he's a father, he's an author. But what I want to really dig into today is sonship, right? By way of fatherhood. And I feel like one thing that has helped me to be a better father to my son is learning to be a better son to my heavenly Father. And so I've gotten a chance to become really good friends with your son, and I admire his fire, I admire his dedication, but he's not a Generation 1 guy. Yeah. He's a Generation 2 guy, right? And I've had this thought a few years ago that the chains that we don't break, they get placed on our sons and our daughters. And so I want to ask some questions, and I would love for you to share some wisdoms on what are some of the chains, right, that the men and some of the families that are listening to this podcast, what are some of the chains that we might be carrying around that maybe we don't even know? So you could help us to identify some of those. And then also, once we identify them, how do we break them? Yeah, that's good. So thanks for being here. I love you. I love your family. I've benefited so much from what God has put on you. And I'm just praying that it will be multiplied on this show too.
That's so good.
Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. And I really admire you. Love football, so
That's what your son was saying. I'm like, okay,
but
good. I have
I'm a
something to talk to him
49er
about.
fan, so I got to say that that there's a little bit of tension here.
Yeah, well, I played for 5 teams, and as long as they would pay my bills, that's what I was loyal to, especially in that season of my life, because I used all of my time, talents, and treasures to build my own kingdom up, right? And there were some mistakes that I made as a father, and I really didn't give my life to the Lord until my son was 11. He's 16 now, and I definitely, God has healed so many things, right? But there's also some things that my 16-year-old son experienced in me that my 3-year-old never will. And so what did you have to do in yourself in order for your son, Jason, who's a little older than me, 43?
He's 44, I think.
44. Yeah. What did you do or display that encouraged him to choose the life that you're both leading together? Because my desire is that my sons choose me later in life, and not just choose me, but roll with me. Yeah, well, honestly, I think just following the Lord and living your life authentically, and not, I think that I have this struggle that I'll tell you about a little bit in my theology, in that we call the worship, what happens when music starts at church worship. And the challenge is that the connotation is that after the music's over, that it's no longer worship. Right. And the challenge is that we create a dualistic life where when I come to church I worship, but the rest of my life isn't. And I'd offer up the idea that Romans 12 says that I'm offering my body as a living sacrifice, which is my spiritual service of worship. And that once I receive Jesus Christ, that from that day on, everything I do is sacred. So I don't have a secular life anymore.
And when Jesus talked about in Matthew 6, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. A lot of people have a list, like first I seek the kingdom, then my family, then, maybe whatever my job, my ministry. But Jesus only gave us one priority, seek the kingdom. So my point is that if you see yourself as a royal priest, and you realize that you've offered your body as a living sacrifice, then what I do at work and what I do with my family is as holy as what I do on Sunday morning when the music's going and I'm raising my hands. And I think it changes everything when you realize that your family becomes a holy ground. It becomes holy ground, and your children are your first ministry. And if it doesn't work at home, it doesn't work anywhere else. And Paul went on to say that if you don't manage your own family well, that you can't even be a deacon in church. So I think all those things create in me the idea that what I'm doing with my family is really important to God. And it's not, and what I do with my family, if I do it onto my kids, I'm doing it onto the Lord. So I think that when you see your role as a father or mother as a holy sacrifice to God, then it changes everything. And so I think that really, helped to make what we're doing at home holy and important. And it also means that sometimes like at Bethel Church, when the worships, happens a certain way and there's a certain feel in the room, it's like, wow, God could do anything. But I'd like to point out that when there's no music, it's still worship. Yeah. And God could do anything. So I think that, pulling the supernatural into your home and making it part of, family, and making and praying for our house to be like a house of Acts where miracles happen, our kids participate, and from the time they're really young, they're seeing miracles and wonders and signs, and they're seeing demons cast out, they're seeing healings happen, and as they get a little bit older, they're participating. All of that's just, I think, a part of like building a bond with God and building a bond with them.
That was good. I'm writing notes because these questions that I'm asking you, I want the listeners and the viewers to benefit, but I'm being serious. Like,
that's good.
This is my game plan. So this is what I'm hearing you say, Kris. I'm hearing you say, number one, live authentically. Like, be who God created you to be as an example to your kids. Now, remember, the list that I'm about to read you came from the question, what do we do or what do we become so our children will choose us and choose this lifestyle later on? Number one, live authentically. Number two, you didn't say these words, but I'm hearing you say no compartmentalization, right? Like worship doesn't stop. And one of the things, like I've always, not always, since God got a hold of me, I've looked at winning different, right? Yeah. Like if you do it for the glory of God, winning is worship, right? Yeah. So number two, no compartmentalization, worship doesn't stop. Number three, always seek first the kingdom, Matthew 6:33. Number four, see your role as a father as a holy sacrifice. So I'm hearing you say, like, shift your perspective. Number four, shift your perspective, shift your identity. See your role as a holy sacrifice. And what I'm hearing you say is, like, as I did that, it gave me a holy purpose that was bigger than me. Yeah. So it wasn't like, hey, let me change these diapers and say these prayers because that's my job. No, it's like, hey, this is a holy sacrifice to a perfect God who chose me. Yeah. And then number five, I'm hearing you say, expose them early and often to the supernatural.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I said to a guy who was changing diapers in the bathroom. This is a few years ago. I said, "Oh, you got babysitting duty." Just being funny. He goes, "No, I'm a dad."
Wow.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not on duty. I'm a dad.
Yeah.
And I thought that was profoundly powerful. Yeah, I think that I think one of the verses that most everyone as a Christian can quote is 2 Corinthians 5:17. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away and new things have come. But for me, one of the most profound verses is the previous verse. And it says, we no longer know each other after the flesh. we knew Christ this way once before, but we know him no longer this way. And then the next verse says, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. And I think that one of the things that are important, you were talking about breaking chains, generational chains off of people. And I came up, my father drowned when I was 3. I had 2 stepfathers who were very abusive. My first stepfather was extremely abusive. And, and I think that there can be, and there should be at times, an emphasis on breaking those chains. But I think chains fall off when we actually follow Christ. Like, I don't want to live in opposition to the way I was treated. I don't want to live in reaction to the way I was treated. I don't want to live in reaction to what the devil's trying to do with my kids. I don't want to spend most of my time thinking of the battle plan the enemy has for us, because I want my kids to be God focused. And I want to be focused on what is the Lord doing in my children. And so, part of the challenge that we have is that, Jesus grew up down the street from, a lot of the Pharisees and scribes, and when Jesus was, doing miracles and being proclaimed as the Christ, they're like, well, isn't he Joseph's son? Like, isn't he the son of Mary? Like, whoa, what?
Right.
And I think that sometimes we know each other, we know our children after the flesh, but we don't actually know them after the spirit. And Proverbs says, if you train up a child in the way they should go. So I think that prophetic insight and foresight into who's growing up on our home is really profoundly powerful, because we can end up with that's Joseph's son mentality and not realizing who's actually growing up in our home, that there's a world changer and a history maker who's 2 years old in our home and is, maybe still pooping their pants and, still needs discipline. And we can actually know them so much after the flesh that we lose sight of who's actually growing up in our home. So I think that, I think it's really important for us as fathers and mothers that we actually are spiritually aware, that we have discernment. And I'm not just talking about the discernment of demons. I'm talking about that we're discerning. The gift of discernment is not called the gift of discerning of evil spirits. It's called the gift of discerning of spirits. And we also need to know that human spirit that God put in each of us that is made in his image. Like, what are they prone to in God? Who's growing up in our home? Not just what should they do, but who is it that's growing up in our home? And I think that, and then we can create, a battle plan from the standpoint of where the enemy's maybe going to try to influence them. But more importantly, we can actually develop a plan around how do we raise this specific child in the way they should go, because we know them after the Spirit. And one of the things that we do is we expose our kids to people that will actually help them in life. And somebody once said, show me your friends and I'll show you your destiny. And so it's like if my son is a football player and he loves football and he's a competitor, and I want to make sure that I expose him to righteous young men and righteous fathers who love the sport, but that have noble character. If I have another son who wants to be a concert pianist and loves music, I want to make sure that I'm exposing him to people that have a similar call and interest, but also have noble character and love God. So that as they grow up, they're surrounded by people that, it's hard to become what you haven't seen or heard. So when you have a role model that's like, hey, that person has the same divine call in their life, but they also have noble character. I'm not exposing them to somebody who's just going after their gift but has no noble character. And I think those things are important, and you can't do that unless you're living future present, unless you have, if you're living past present with your kids, and it's, your view of them is the last time you had to discipline them, as opposed to your view of them is what God says they're becoming. It's really difficult to shepherd a child after the reactions and responses to their failings, as opposed to a response to God's purpose and destiny in their life.
you get exposed and mentored and get to speak to a lot of men. And I just heard you speaking about prophetic vision, right? You're talking about foresight, meaning like the things that will come to pass. Then you're talking about insight, like what is happening right now. And what I've noticed, and I've only been in men's ministry and really pursuing the Lord full time for 5 years and 2 months. But what I've noticed, and it was the case with me, it's like I couldn't have prophetic vision. I couldn't even have prophetic dreams because I was stuck with the hindsight. Right. I'm constantly looking back at some of the things and meditating on some of the things that nobody really even knew, like being sexually molested by a man when I was 12. Honestly, if I look back at it, that was really the motivation came out of a father wound, right? Because like my dad didn't protect me. And then after it happened, like I didn't feel like he was there, whatever it is that I make up in my mind. And my dad was a wonderful dad. Still married to my mom, like 40 some years. And so as I'm struggling through, healing through those things in these last couple of years, and I feel like who knows if it's full healing, but I feel like I'm walking in freedom, brother. Look at me. I have the joy of the Lord. And I say that to say, did you go through a process of identifying, like, man, what's some of the junk? Like, I think it's Romans 12:2. It says, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I was kind of sharing with you after I met the Holy Spirit, I knew that I needed to renew my mind. But as an athlete, I said, like, well, how can I do my part, God? How can I take this discipline that I've created in myself, but instead of using it to build my own kingdom, I put it on you. And if you can heal my mind and heal my heart in this next year, I'll give you everything that I have. And he did that. But like, what was your journey like? Because you're saying you grew up with some dysfunction.
Yeah, I grew up in dysfunction, and then, spiritually, I had wonderful fathers. So I just have to say that I'm so thankful that the day I got saved, the man who led me to the Lord said, he brought 2 young men to me. I was 18. He brought 2 guys, but one was probably 22, the other 23. And he said, you're like a child, you need a father. And he said, which one of these men do you want to be your father? So the day I got saved, I had a spiritual father. And his name was Art, and he was amazing. And then, later on, I met Bill Johnson and another man named Bill Derryberry. So, I've been blessed to have godly, really good men in my life, and that have disciplined me, that have mentored me, that have given me a model. Again, you can't become what you haven't seen or heard. So, watching these men, it's been beautiful. And I understand that people that are listening to us, this is not everyone's experience, that they come into a church and they end up with really healthy leadership. But I've always had, not perfect leadership, but I've always had healthy leadership. But one of the things that happened to me when I was 43 years old is I had an experience where I realized that there were still things in my life that I didn't actually like myself. And
I relate a lot to that.
Yeah, it was exposed when a man gave me $30,000, and then I avoided him for 6 months. And I went to bed one night when I had seen him in the restroom, and I knew he didn't see me. And I turned around and ran out, and I got home that night, and I'm like, why am I behaving like this? And then I had this encounter with the Lord, and he said, well, his name was Eli, and he said, well, Eli gave you $30,000, and you don't love yourself $30,000 worth, and you're afraid that if Eli gets to know you, he'll be sorry he gave you the money. And then it just began this process, and I said, what's the answer? He said, why don't you love you as I love you? Because you can only love your neighbor as you love yourself. Everybody needs a big as. If you don't love you, you can't love them. And I realized that I had taken on my stepfather's value for myself. And even though I had broken most of the behavioral patterns, and that I did walk in I think what I would say is a high level of nobility with my family, and I didn't have addictions, but I still did not enjoy myself. I did not like myself. And the next year, I actually wrote this book, The Supernatural Ways of Royalty. That
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, it was actually my journey. And, that book is actually about my journey. And so for the next year, solid, at least 12 months, every time I opened the Bible, I could just throw it on the floor and it would open to, I love you with an everlasting love. And I'm like, well, And the Lord I'd say that he just loved the hell right out of me. And what I thought was humility, he says was self-hatred. And the Lord redefined humility to me. Like, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less. And I just began to realize, like, what I had actually grown up in a spiritual culture that actually assisted me in not liking me, even though they didn't know that's what was happening. It's like, don't be prideful, don't be arrogant. It's like putting yourself down was kind of seen as a part of humility. And it's all fine. We still have, really, fun, kind of sarcastic humor. But, if I would meet a brand new person, and I was in business, so I was always meeting people, I would come home at night and say, John doesn't like me, to my wife. And she'd go, well, how do you know it? Well, I just could feel it. But the challenge is, I didn't like me. And I love Danny Silk. He coined this phrase, intimacy means into me you see. And the challenge is that when I got in a room with somebody new, I would be so afraid that they were going to see in me what I thought I saw in me. I guess you would call that now the imposter syndrome. And so I would reject them. I would build a case against them. I would be like, well, here's 5 reasons why I don't care if they like me.
Yeah.
And what actually was happening is that I was terrified that they were not going to like me. So I just reduced them so it didn't matter. And I did that.
So you'll reject them before they can reject you.
Yeah, and it's actually a common ecosystem in most of our lives when we don't like ourselves. And then it can get worse. Like, you can find people to punish you. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room with counseling, somebody, a woman who's in a really bad marriage, when she's being physically beaten, emotionally destroyed, her children being beaten, and she attracts these kind of men because she feels that she needs to be punished, and she doesn't like being punished, but it brings a sense of justice to her sense of, I sinned and therefore I deserve to be punished. And when you don't realize, if you don't apply the blood of Jesus to your life, and you don't realize that Jesus has forgiven you from the need for justice because he created justice on the cross so he could release mercy to you. So Jesus didn't just die for me, he died as me. I was with Christ on the cross. So what I deserved happened on the cross. And therefore, I no longer have to look for someone to punish me for the things I've done wrong, because there's something in it. Think about criminals, they almost always leave a trail, an evidence trail, because unconsciously they want to be caught. It's written into our DNA. Justice is written into our DNA. And if we're not careful, we'll do penance, which means, like Peter and Judas both denied Christ. Judas went out and hung himself. He created his own redemption. And Peter became the head of the church. And so we have to learn how to fail successfully, because when we fail, we have this inner workings, like we are like wired like God. So it's like, we know that with sin deserves punishment. But if we don't apply the cross to that, we don't let Jesus take our sin for us, we end up finding ways to punish ourselves, whether it's living in financial poverty, whether it's living in rejection, like nobody likes me. Well, if nobody likes you, that's probably not their problem. There's this common denominator, that would be you. And so, and then realizing that we teach other people how to treat us by the way we treat ourselves, If I come to your house and there's trash all over the place and, junk cars in the front room and the windows are knocked out and your house is a total disaster, I might put my feet up on your coffee table. But if you come over to my house and you live in that dump, and my house is, it doesn't have to be a mansion, but it's clean and it's obviously cared for, you may put your feet up on your table, but you probably wouldn't do that on my table. Why? Because the environment I create, the environment I have within me becomes the environment around me, and I teach you how to treat me by the way I treat me. But if I don't like myself and I don't treat myself well, I teach you it's okay to mistreat me. And those are all things that we have to teach our children. Like, we have to teach our children, you may have done something wrong, but you're not a bad person. You're not, it's like, There's a difference between I did something wrong and I am something wrong. And once our children figure out that they are something wrong, they will invite punishment into their lives.
Yeah.
They will invite disaster into their lives.
That's good. This is what I'm hearing you say, Kris. I'm hearing you say the question was.
Did I answer the question?
No, you did great. No, you did great. I do my best to be a good listener and take notes. The question was, if I know that there's something that's not right in me and I don't like it, and I want to break those chains, what do I do? And you said the first thing is find a spiritual mentor, right? Like you had those that you pursued and had in your life. One of them was Art. Yeah, that was the first one. And then you had Pastor Bill Johnson. Yeah. And so step one would be find a mentor that you can trust and that has the fruit that you want. Yeah. You didn't say that, but I feel like that's what I'm hearing you say, because you're not going to choose a mentor unless he physically has the fruit that you want, but then also the fruits of the Spirit. Is he representing and living what it is that you want to step into? Step one. Step two is take genuine, sober self-inventory. Yeah. Right? And like, what are the things about me that I don't like? And are they changeable? Step three, I'm hearing you say, is get in the Word. And when you got in the Word, I'm hearing you say that you were able to identify the unworthiness, the unforgiveness, the resentment, the imposter syndrome, the rejection, the abandonment. You were able to see the difference between guilt and shame, right? Yep. Guilt is, I did a bad thing. Shame is, I am a bad thing. I learned that from your son, and I'm sure he learned that from you. And then step four, I'm hearing you say, learn to lead your flesh, right? Like learn to not let your flesh lead you. Viktor Frankl said this. He said, and I just heard this quote the other day. He said, there's an area between stimulus and reaction, and that's where destiny is created. Wow. So how did you make decisions based upon who you wanted to be and not how you were feeling in those different circumstances? Well,
let me say this, like, who I want to be is actually who I'm created to be. So I would say the most profound thing that happened in my life is I didn't determine that I was a good man. God did. Yeah. He said, I made you in my image and in my likeness. And God don't make junk. So, he said to me, every time you think bad about you, you're actually insulting me. Because think about it. The Father was the artist, right? The Father was the artist. He was the painter. Jesus was the model, and we're the painting. So he's the one who said, you're amazing. You were created after me. You look like me. The attributes that I've given you are attributes of God. So when I don't like me, I'm insulting him. Right. So I think the biggest thing is what I found in the Word is you are loved. You were born to be amazing. You were born for glory. Jesus prayed, Father, the glory you gave me, I want to give to them that they may be one. And so as far as we know, we are God's most beautiful creation. And so I'm not thinking, well, what do I want to be? I'm thinking that's important, of course, that's secondary. But the most important piece is, what did he create me to be? And so when I came to grips with, I'm a love creation, I'm the only creature, you're the only creature, we're the only creature ever made in the image of God. And therefore, when I don't like me, I'm insulting him. And so it's not humility, it's stupidity to not like yourself. And so I think that what I found in the Word, what I found in other men, what I found in my relationship, my personal relationship with God, is that this is who you made me to be. And everything else is a perversion. It's the wrong version. And what I need to do is not get back to what I want to be, but I need to get back to the right version of me. What's the best version of me? I'm not to be you, I'm to be me. He crafted me different than he crafted you, but he crafted us both in his image, and he crafted us both to be men of glory, men who are to be noble. He put that in me. I have an ability to pervert it, but I don't have an ability to create it. He created that.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say it's not something that you create, it's something that you agree with.
Exactly.
I'm hearing you say in somewhere in between that fourth and fifth step, I had a revelation that all I need to do is agree with God's opinion of me, and
Exactly.
I shall advance.
Yeah, because he's the one who made me noble. I didn't. I can't make myself noble. I can pervert myself. But the goodness that's in me is coming from him. Like he's good and he made me good. So I have to make me bad. Are you with me?
Yeah.
I have to make me bad because he made me good. I'm the wrong version when I'm bad. I'm not real. I'm not authentic. So when I'm being authentic, I'm not going to be authentically bad because he made me. I'm going to be authentically good. So I'm a poser when I'm bad.
Right.
I'm not a poser when I'm good. Like, I'm afraid you're going to get to know me and you're going to see something bad in me. That's actually a complete lie.
Yeah.
The thing is, if I was behaving bad and you really got to know me, you know that I was good. Because the guy who made me is good, and he goes, I'll craft you after me. So when I'm posing is when I'm bad. I'm a fake when I'm bad. I'm not being real when I'm bad.
Well, we're about to go back to this conference and serve these men.
Yes, we are.
But I have one more question. This
Okay.
one's for me. I hope
Okay.
they benefit from it.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed myself doing in my pursuit of building my own world is I put my family on the altar as a sacrifice. And one thing, if I have to say I have a fear, my first fear would be that the Spirit of the Lord would leave me, because now I felt it and I don't ever want to go back. But the one I want you to speak on is, how do I keep the main thing the main thing? Like, how do I not put my family, and I'm focused on not doing this, but I've seen so many pastors and so many men of God and, these guys that I look up to, they sacrifice their family a couple years down the road. Like, they get divorced, and now I'm like, but he was the guy, So I don't idolize those men, but it is just like you. It's like important for me to have a mentor that I'm following along. And what are the things that you've done to not pursue being a super mega popular pastor, because it's there for you, right?
Yes.
So how have you kept the main thing? And then what would your encouragement for me and for the men that are watching this that are like, man, I want to make God the main thing. I want to be a legacy maker, but I also want to be successful.
Yeah. When we received Christ, we received him through covenant, right? Take this bread, broken body, this blood. I made a covenant with Christ. It wasn't based on a feeling.
Right.
And I made a covenant with my wife. So there are fun days and not so fun days. There are happy days and there are sad days. But there aren't days when I even think, well, man, I would want to be in this marriage. Or I look over at that woman and think, I wonder what she'd be like. I mean, I'm not trying to not do that. I just, I don't have a big, I can't do that because I have a big yes. And my yes is, I met this woman when she was 12. I got engaged to her when she was 13. And I got married to her when she was 17. I've had sex with one woman. And I have a big yes over here. And because I have a yes over here, these are all, I don't have to say no to them because I have a big yes. So I'm not daily going, no, no, no. I'm just daily going, yes. And so therefore I don't have other options. Like I have one option, and that is to love this woman well and to love her. My wife has Parkinson's. And so, she's doing well, by the way. She hunts and fishes, and she killed a bear last year. But my point is that you either bond or break in battle. There's no options. Like, you don't stay the same.
I agree.
So when she was diagnosed with Parkinson's that night, I said, Lord, what do I do? He said, no one should ever suffer alone. That was his counsel to me. No one should ever suffer alone. And I thought, this will be an opportunity. Obviously, I believe my wife's going to be healed. I believe that. But in the meantime, in the journey, this is my opportunity to bond with her and to let her know, I don't love you because you perform well. I love you because you're my woman. You're the woman of my dreams. You're the other half of me. And my kids, they all respond out of that. And so, when there's a hard day, I don't even think about, like, I hear couples come in, I've done lots of counseling in the early days with couples, and they're like, she did this and this, and I want a divorce. And I'm like, divorce? I've never thought about divorce. I'm sure my wife's thought about murder a few times. But it's like, we're in this forever. And we've gone through, somebody said, I think jokingly partly, but I've been married to the 7 different women with the same first and last name. And we've been through a metamorphosis because we were together as kids. And we changed, but because we're bonded, we're changing together. Yeah. We're experiencing things in God together. We're experiencing family together, and we're experiencing problems together. And it's just the pressure pushes us together more, and it makes us one person. So what I see some people doing is, when we build a battle plan that's based on what the enemy wants to do, then I'm focusing on, like, what's he trying to do in my marriage? Right. And it's like, I'm not saying I should be unaware of the schemes of the devil, but what I'm really aware of is the plan of God for my marriage and for my children. And I want to be in it. And as my kids have gotten older, now I have grandkids. I have 11 grandkids and a great-grandson, and 3/4 of my grandkids are teenagers or in their 20s. It's like, we're older, and our grandkids have nothing socially in common with us. They're in a different place in our life. But, we have a really nice house, and Kathy buys the kind of things they like to eat, which is, 2 of my kids like Dr. Pepper, 3 of my kids like this, and, and we have a pool, and we have this big house. So, like, we don't need this house, but it's a way for us to stay connected. It's a way for us to say, you're always welcome here. It's a way for, it's some of my kids I have a couple of grandkids that aren't totally walking with God. So you're as welcome as the kids who are in a radical relationship. Like, this is your home. There'll always be a place for you. And we will always do what we can to say, we're interested in you, and we'll do what you need. We'll do what we need to do to make you feel comfortable in our home.
Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I so appreciate how you think and the way that you're living your life. You're giving a great example to the rest of us.
Thank you.
I want to recommend Supernatural Ways of Royalty. That's the name, right? Yep. Patrick was just telling me, I was like, man, give me some good questions to ask Kris. And he's like, well, you'd really like this book, because this is what you coach and preach on, and this is what your freedom. So I definitely want to recommend that. And then where can we send people before we end the show?
Well, you can send them to Kris Vallotton or kvministries.com.
Okay.
BethelChurch.com. I mean, there's just like 100 ways to get in touch with us. Yeah. But kvministries.com will get you directly in touch with us. And then obviously we're on Facebook. It's KV Ministries. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know what we're
He's probably out there.
LinkedIn.
He's probably out there on TikTok too.
We're on
he doesn't
TikTok
even
too,
know.
by the way. We're on TikTok. My team's like, we got to be on TikTok. I'm like, what, who? And
yeah.
So we're pretty much on every social media platform. So yeah, and YouTube, of course.
Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
And for everybody else that's back there, if this episode spoke to you, share it with somebody. And we're praying and believing that you'll take the seeds that we're planting and that they would find fertile soil in you, and you wouldn't just get freedom, that you would get transformation in Jesus' name. Thanks for joining us.